Hello and welcome to my Patreon page. And today I'm talking to all you scavengers. What a horrible name. Don't know why I gave you that name really, but never mind. Thanks again for your patronage. It is greatly appreciated. Now, owing to the fact there's been a singular dearth of questions about what I'm doing, I thought I'd go a little bit more on about the latest book, The Dead Don't Wait. I've written a bit about that in the main blog, which went out to pilgrims, all about the month just gone. But I thought it might be useful if I just run through a few of the things that inspired me about this book and got me writing it. Because different books always start from different points. One thing I would say is that it's been great fun going around all the different libraries in the last month, talking to the people up at Barnstaple. They got 16 people and I sold 16 books. Some bought 2 books, some bought no books, but that was a really good, interested audience. Then I went down to Paynton the following Monday. That was a really good talk. They had 18 people, I think. One lady had gone there. It was her birthday. She had family flying in from the States and all over the world, but she had told them, I'm sorry, I can't see you this afternoon because I'm going to a talk by one of my favourite authors, which I thought was rather lovely. So I didn't sing happy birthday to her, but I did sign a book for her with happy birthday, so that was all right. Then I went to somewhere else where we had a really good audience, and then I went to another place where we had an audience of one, which was embarrassing. That was not very good. That was down at Totnes, which normally I would have expected to get a few more people, but I've had small audiences before. There was a time when I went out to the States on a signing trip and I arrived at this massive great area. They had over 100 seats laid out. They had big speakers, a podium, microphone, everything. And when I went up there was a grand total of 3 people in the audience. There's one rather scary looking lady in the front row and then 2 pleasant middle-aged people at the back. And I started chatting, and within 5 minutes the 2 at the back said, sorry, we've got to go and catch an aeroplane, and walked out. So I was left with scary lady. Normally I would just say, look, why don't we go out and find a bar and we can have a one-to-one conversation rather than taking up all of this space. But she was determined to listen to my talk, so I was stuck there. These things happen sometimes. I remember Simon Brett talking about going to an event once in Germany, and I think it might have been before the wall came down. It was East Germany, and he stood up and there was this massive theatre and it was absolutely empty apart from one guy sitting halfway up. And so Simon, being Simon, said, why don't we go and find a bar, we'll have a chat over a drink. And they said, no, you here talk, you talk. I said, okay. So poor old Simon stood up, gave half his talk, and there was an interval at half time. And when he wandered off to get a cup of coffee, he heard a piano playing, and when he went back, the bloke in the audience was the pianist. He wasn't going to give up his gig just so that Simon could go for a beer. Anyway, these things do happen. But I had the idea for a talk based on the Rudyard Kipling poem, which goes, I keep 6 honest men, they taught me all I knew. Their names are what and where and when and how and why and who. And those are pretty much the ideal questions that you want to be asking about any book. So I thought, well, that'd be a useful sort of foundation for a talk. So this is pretty much encapsulated what I gave as my talk to all the libraries. So the first question was why? Why did I want to write the Blackjack series? And the reason was I like crime. I'd been forced to move away from crime and start writing warfare books because a new editor at Simon & Schuster decided she really preferred the idea of warfare. So I started writing war books, which I was pleased with. I mean, I like the Vintner series, I like Pilgrim's War, but I won't have anything more to do with Simon & Schuster because they're not doing anything to sell my books. I'm actually trying now to get the rights back to all of my books from them. I don't know if I'll succeed, I'm hopeful, but there's no way of telling. But I was persuaded to write these war books, and after the first book in the Vintner series, I really decided I needed something that was going to be much more light-hearted that I could write at the same time. And it was because of that I decided to write humorous crime. Crime I know about, I can write about crime, no problem at all. Humorous is much more difficult, but I thought if I wrote shorter books it would be easier to fill a certain amount of humour into them. So that was the why. It was basically to give myself a holiday from some of the more violent battles and so on that I was writing about with Crécy and Poitiers and the Siege of Calais. So next is what? Well, it was going to be humour because I wanted something much more light-hearted. I could go into that in a lot more detail, but there's really no point. It was definitely going to be crime because crime is so pleasant for so many people. It's the second most popular genre, which still surprises me, but crime is very, very important to a lot of readers. So I thought, okay, I'll stick to humorous crime. When? What period? Now that was a lot more difficult. This is going back 5 or so years ago, and at the time the Tudors had just appeared on TV and Wolf Hall was coming out. Everybody was interested in Henry VIII and Elizabeth. And I thought, well, I can't write any more about them. You know, you've got Shard Lake, you've got all the other brilliant writers covering Henry VIII, and then, I mean, everybody and his dog has covered Elizabeth. I can't write about them. And then I thought, but they weren't the only Tudors. I could write about the ones in the middle. Well, Edward, he didn't live long enough really. And then I thought, Mary Tudor, what a perfect lady. And of course her reputation has come down through the centuries. She's called Bloody Mary. And some people think that's a bit unfair because they say, well, yeah, she wasn't that bad. It was a pretty brutal time she was living in. Yeah, true. But I've got a book here, Mary Tudor, Jasper Ridley. It's called The Life and Times of Mary Tudor by Jasper Ridley. It was published by Weidenfeld and Nicholson in 1973, which is roughly when I bought it. It shows what a nerd I was for history, even when I was 12 years old. In that book, though, it says Henry VIII burned 10 heretics in 24 years, so one every 2 years. All right, let's go in some. Sorry, that was Henry VII. Henry VIII burned 81 in 38 years, so he burned 2 a year. So going from 1 every 2 years to 2 per annum. That included 1 Catholic. The rest weren't. 2 Protestant extremists were burned during the 6-year reign of Edward VI. That's 1 every 3 years. 5 were burned by Elizabeth I in her 44 years. So she only got rid of 1 every 9 years, which really isn't putting enough effort into it, I think. Mary, however, burned 283 in under 4 years. So she averaged about 71 per annum. So you can begin to understand why she was known as Bloody Mary. She was pretty much committed to her task. And of course she saw to the execution of Lady Jane Grey, a terrible danger at 16 years old. So that pretty much set the scene for me. I thought any series that I can call the Bloody Mary series has a lot going for it. Not just vodka, it just appeals. This is only tea, not vodka. So I thought, that's my period then. So then I had to decide who was going to be the hero. Now, with this, I pinched this from John Gardner. There are 3 books over there by John Gardner on that bookshelf, and they are The Liquidator, Amberline and Madrigal. And the idea for them was that a guy called Mostyn from the security service, later to become MI6, witnessed a British soldier at the back end of the Second World War confronted with 3 German soldiers with their hands up. They'd thrown down their weapons, they were surrendering. This English soldier shot them to death, all 3 of them, with a submachine gun. Mostyn thought, that's a cold-blooded, callous killer. I ought to report him, but I won't. I'll just keep an eye on him, because if we ever need an assassin as the British government, he would be the man to go for. Lo and behold, in the 60s, they needed an assassin. So Mostyn tracked down this guy, Boise Oakes, and said, I'm going to give you a flat in Kensington, really good salary, a bonus scheme, lovely car, and you can get lots of young ladies. And Boise Oakes was interested because his wife had just left him. She'd run off with his business partner. He had been left with no money, and he was, the thought of a nice flat in Kensington, good money, that was very appealing. So he agreed. However, there was one little problem with this, and that was that Boise Oakes was no killer. In fact, when he killed those Germans, it's because he had just got out of his tank, he'd stubbed his foot on a brick, and the gun went off by accident. He was not a callous, cold-hearted person. He was just frankly appalled at what he had done. So Mostyn had the wrong man. That's the start point of The Liquidator. And I loved that concept. So I thought someone who is an inveterate coward, who has an overinflated opinion of himself, who doesn't like the sight of blood, but can't turn down this offer which is so good. I thought that would make for a fantastic humorous story. As for where and how, well, the where is going to vary, but it's going to be largely based around London. But obviously the story is going to move around the country as different things occur. As to the why, how. How's much more important than why. As to the how, well, I've always written in the same way, which is I have a start point, I develop some strong characters, and then I see how the characters are going to respond to the different things I throw at them. So poor old Jack Blackjack, my hero, in the first book he's been knocked out, he comes to and discovers himself at the back of a pub. He's got a dagger in his hand, it's his dagger, and it's covered in blood, and next to him there's a bloke who's dead. I thought that's an interesting situation, how would he react, and leads on from there. And this is where the man who knocked on the door has actually been sent away. Hey ho. So, the question is, where was I? So anyway, the second book was really good because that had Jack being commissioned to go and commit a murder, but unfortunately, while chatting to other people, he fell over a body, and it was the body of the person he was supposed to murder. Now this gave him a problem because he couldn't tell anybody that this person had been murdered by someone else because he was supposed to murder them. He couldn't admit to his boss that he hadn't committed the murder because that wouldn't add to his credibility. On the other hand, he didn't like the thought of a second assassin wandering around the place and potentially trying to destroy the competition, i.e. kill Jack. So that gave him an interesting series of problems. Then the third book was based on Jack in London, and he's in a bit of bother because he's been looking after a Spanish gentleman, hoping to rob him, and then the Spanish gentleman is discovered dead at the same time as somebody else that Jack is supposed to kill, and is then suddenly told not to kill, accidentally kills him, which is a bit confusing, I know, but you've got to read the book to work that one out. And then this latest one, I thought a good start point would be when he's accused of a murder, but it's not someone he's supposed to have killed, it's someone that he's never heard of, but he's been accused of this murder at the same time as his two gamblers are trying to put the squeeze on him for money that he didn't really owe them, and another woman's trying to blackmail him into paying money because she and her husband are basically trying to find money that way. Made that book very interesting too. The next one, I've got to figure out the new start point. It's always quite fun though when you figure out something really difficult and rather baffling for poor old Jack, and then just throw him into the situation. Now it may seem odd because a lot of people expect crime writers in particular to have fully plotted synopses for their stories. So you normally expect a lot of people expect crime writers to have blow by blow, chapter by chapter workings so that they know exactly where the story's going and how they're going to get to the end. The trouble is, all too often, that means that the author gets to a point in his plot where the character has to do a certain thing, and the author will make the character behave as they expect. and it may be completely out of character for that person to behave in that way. So this is why a lot of professional authors do not produce fully detailed synopses. I don't, Susanna Gregory doesn't, Karen Maitland doesn't, Bernard Knight doesn't, and okay, let's get on to the famous ones. Stephen King doesn't, Ian Rankin doesn't, Anne Cleeves doesn't, because of that same reason. In fact, J.R. Tolkien, R.R. Tolkien, in his diary noted one day that he was really not very happy because he had been writing this nice scene and a character had suddenly materialised and he had no idea who the character was, what the character was doing in the book, what the character was going to do for the rest of the book, anything else about him. It was a scene in a pub in Bree, the Prancing Pony, and the character was this strange ranger called Strider, and Tolkien had no idea who he was, what he was going to do in that book. So if Tolkien can do it with the king of Gondor and everywhere else, I think I can do it with Jack Blackjack. I have tried to write books with fully detailed plots all the way through before now. Actually, The Last Templar was written like that. I had a complete flowchart on the floor about exactly what was going to happen in the book, and I had to throw away the flowchart halfway through writing the book because I suddenly realised that if it was so bloody obvious to me who had committed the crime, it would be to any reader too. So I threw away that plot and had to get on with writing the story more naturalistically, more organically. Very difficult just now. I've broken the arms on this chair, so they're deeply uncomfortable. I've got a nice man over the road who works in leather, and he's building up 2 leather cushions to go on the chair instead. But just today it's very uncomfortable. Right, so that's that book. And that's about it for the month of July going into August. Apologies that this is a bit late. I did intend to get this done last week, but with the book launch for Dead Don't Wait, it's just, there's been too much going on. I intend to be a little bit more reliable with my timings for the future. But the best intentions often go wrong, don't they? Hey ho. Anyhow, I hope that was a little bit interesting. I hope that's given you a feel for how I work and what I've done with Dead Don't Wait. I'm now working extensively on One Last Dance Before I Die, which is set in 1922 in Shanghai. And I have to admit, it is working out bloody well now. It's been a horrible rewrite, this one. But I think I've got 3 more weeks to go and it'll be put to bed. And I hope it will be available from a publisher not too far from you in the not too distant future. Next time, hopefully, I'll have a bit more information about the Templar series and the Vintner trilogy and the Crusades stories too, because, as I say, I'm hoping I'll be able to take the rights back from Simon & Schuster and start selling them again, because they're selling no books at all. Since I started working with Simon & Schuster, originally they did marketing, but for the last 3 books, the sum total of their marketing has been, I think, 2 tweets, not even an announcement on Facebook to say that they've launched the books, which is just disgraceful. It's destroyed my income. However, if I can get the rights back, then life will get a lot easier again. I might even think about a holiday. That'd be nice. Right, that's your lot for now. Thanks very much for watching. Thanks very much for your patronage, and I look forward to speaking to you soon. In the meantime, have a great month of August, and I'll speak to you at the end of August, early September. Take care. Cheers.